Hi, boys and girls, it's Miss O'Connell. I'm going to go ahead and move my computer over, and here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to read a story to you. So, as you know, we just finished, and today's Thursday, so that's really the truth. We just finished our unit on the passing of time, or really, sometimes we call it sequencing, right? So, I'm going to be reading a story to you today that is all about the passing of time. So, I want you to really think about how the author, and in this case, Tony Johnson and Tommy DePaulo, how they show the passage of time. We talked a lot this week about how authors can show that time is passing in many different ways. We read biographies where authors used ages and they used specific dates to show passing of time. We read stories like in Charlotte's Web, where E.B. White, the author, uses seasons to tell you that time is passing. As the days turned cold, we knew that winter was approaching, right? We also know that you, as a writer, use sequencing words, or we call them linking words, right? Like first, next, after that. We know that in stories like Goldilocks, they might use times of the day, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or morning, afternoon, and evening. So there are lots of different ways that an author can show that time is passing. We're going to really pay specific attention to how Tony Johnson and Tommy DePaulo share with their readers that time is passing, sequencing. Now let's begin. This story is called The Quilt Story. Go ahead and pay attention to the title as well as the illustrations. The illustrations may show you things that the words do not. So let's see. Abigail, The Quilt Story. A little girl's mother made the quilt to keep her warm when the snow came down long ago. She stitched the quilt by a yellow flame, humming all the time. She stitched the tails of falling stars, and she stitched the name Abigail. So we're going to read this book that shows the passage of time. As you listen to the book, I really want you to listen and look for hints or clues that time is passing. Okay? Abigail loved the quilt. She wrapped it around her in the quiet dark and watched the winter skies. Sometimes she saw a falling star. Sometimes Abigail played in the woods near her home and had tea. Her dolls had tea, and the quilt had tea all over it. What does that mean? Use the context clues to figure out what's really happening. She might have spilled. The illustrations tell a lot that the words do not. So in this case, the illustration is showing the quilt had tea? The quilt sipped the tea? No, she means that the quilt had tea all over it. On the page. Sometimes she pretended the quilt was a gown. She wore it to town on her horse, clop, 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 and it tore. So her mother stitched it up once more. Sometimes she played hide and seek with her sisters. She laughed and cried, "Don't peek!" and hid under the quilt, and everyone found her. Sometimes Abigail was sick. She sneezed and sneezed, and then she slept under the quilt, and she felt better. The quilt seems to be very special. It seems to keep the girl warm as she plays with it, and it makes her feel better when she feels sick, huh? I want you to think, do you have an object like that? One day, Abigail's family moved away across wide rivers and over hard rock trails. The quilt went too, not stuffed in trunks with the blankets and clothes. It kept the little girls warm from the wild winds, warm from the rain, and warm from the sparkling nights. Now, we talked about how the illustrations add to this story. Do these illustrations help you to understand something about the setting? Remember, a setting is where and when the story takes place. They built a new house in the woods. Abigail's father built it with his hatchet. Chop, chop, chop. He built her a new bed. Chip, chip, chip. Now, what's a hatchet? Sometimes we might come across words as we read that we're just not familiar with. And I can use context clues or pictures to figure out what a hatchet is. Abigail's father built it with his hatchet. Well, This must be her father, so a hatchet must be an axe or a tool that he could use to do that. He made her a new house, too. He worked until curly shavings covered the floor, and everyone sneezed and said, "Welcome home," and was glad, and Abigail felt sad. New house, new horse, new bed. Everything smelled of fresh chops and chips. Everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her, as mothers do, and then tucked her in, and Abigail felt at home again, under the quilt. One day, when the quilt was very old and very loved, Abigail folded it carefully and put it in the attic. Everyone forgot it was there. A gray mouse came and loved the quilt. Her babies were born on top of it, and they grew fat and gray in the warm stuffing. When they got hungry, they ate a falling star. A raccoon came and loved the quilt. She dug a hole in a corner with her black paws and hid an apple in there. A cat came and loved the quilt, a patchwork cat. It rolled on the stars and stuffing spilled out like snow. Well, simile, comparison using like or as. And then the cat curled up in the snow and purred. So that quilt must be a mess. Who or what do you think will love it next? Thinking about this quilt has been loved by many characters now. By Abigail, by her sisters, by the mice, by the raccoon, by the cat. Who do you think's going to love it next? "Kitty, kitty," called the little girl. She found her cat, and she found the quilt, splashed with patterns of sun. The little girl wrapped the quilt around her, and she loved it too. "Can you make it like new?" she asked her mother. So her mother patched the holes, she pushed fresh stuffing in, and she stitched long tails on the stars to swish across the quilt again. One day, the little girl's family moved away, across miles and miles of pavement and snaking gray highways. They found a new house, freshly cleaned, freshly waxed, freshly painted white. Can you tell what time period this part of the story is set in, and how do you know? Maybe it must have been a long time ago. A long time must have passed between the time when Abigail put the quilt away and when the second girl discovered it in the attic. So time is passing. A new girl has come to love this quilt. So we had Abigail, and then we had the mice, and then we had the raccoon, and then we had the cat who were loving the quilt. Now we have a new girl loving the quilt, and her mother helps to make it new. They unpacked and unpacked all night, and everyone sneezed on cardboard dust and said, "Welcome home," and was glad, and the little girl felt sad. Everything smelled of white paint and boxes, everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her as mothers do, and then tucked her in, and she felt at home again under the quilt. What makes her feel like she's at home? Is it the quilt? And so, what do we think about how the author is showing that time is passing in this story? He's using the quilt, and he's using whoever is loving the quilt at the moment to show you that time is passing, that Abigail loved the quilt and had time with the quilt. And then its next owner loved the quilt, right? So this author is telling you that time is passing in a much different way, in a very original way. So what you're going to do now is, after listening to me read this story, you're going to go ahead and click the link, and you're going to go and make an exit slip talking about how you knew that Tommy DePaulo and Tony Johnston were carrying the story on. How did you know that time was passing? Go ahead and go finish that assignment now.